Hey guys, Spud Docker here, as always. And today I am super excited that we finally get to go out and explore the brand new Mariana Islands map together. Early this morning, Eagle Dynamics released an absolutely fantastic trailer showing off the new map. Now, one thing that made the trailer just absolutely fantastic was the fact that they used HBO's The Pacific's main title theme as the music for the video. It was absolutely hair-raising in the fact that Eagle Dynamics really chose a perfect theme song for the trailer for this map. HBO's The Pacific really hit me really hard when I watched it, and it really shows off the true brutality and how terrible the Pacific were as Marines fought for every inch of islands across the Pacific. As we know, Guam, Tinian, and Saipan, the three main islands shown in this map, every single square inch of those islands is soaked in the blood of United States Marines as they fought to take the islands back and liberate them from the Empire of Japan back in 1944. I guess the HBO's The Pacific hit me a lot harder because my grandfather flew as a Marine Corps pilot during World War II, and it just hit me far harder than Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers in that respect, and that I have a more personal connection. And of course, I live on the west coast of the United States, which is far more skewed towards the Pacific theater of World War II in terms of our museums and historical monuments and things of that nature. So thank you, Eagle Dynamics, for making such an amazing trailer that literally almost brought me to tears as I was watching it. That theme song always hits me really hard. So here we're at Anderson Air Force Base flying a kind of under the radar country in the F-16 Fighting Falcon. Now, the Republic of China Air Force is almost fully represented in DCS World by, of course, the F-16 and the F-5s we have behind us. And because this is such a geopolitical hot topic, and we're in the perfect spot with this brand new map, I figured it would be a perfect time to hop in and fly an F-16 from the Republic of China. So we have to here, if you guys want to fly as the ROCAF, the only aircraft that's really missing is the F-1CK, and so that can actually be represented, in my opinion, by an aircraft like the FA-18C, which the F-1CK is kind of like a weird hybrid between an F-16 and an FA-18. So why not just go ahead and use the FA-18 to kind of represent that one missing aircraft? So what we're going to do today is we are going to go ahead and take a look at the F-10 map. We're going to take off from Anderson Air Force Base, and we're going to make a counterclockwise circle around Guam and just take a look at all the different sites we can take a look at. And then we're going to move on. We're going to pass over Rota, and then we're going to head to Tinian and, of course, finish at Saipan and land at Saipan International Airport. So let's go ahead and hop into the office and let's get started, folks. So first thing we'll do is we'll just go ahead and set up our cockpit the way I like to have it set up in the F-16C. And that should be good. So we'll go ahead and start to taxi out, and we'll take a look at all the cool sights on our way towards the runway. Interestingly enough, the performance I'm getting right now, I know it's single player and there's not that many objects out here, is analogous to, whoops, I forgot to turn on my external lights, is very much analogous to what I'm seeing on Syria, but it seems to be slightly better than Syria. This is a very complex airbase that we have here. Just as a side note, the Republic of China Air Force skin for the F5 is really cool. I really like it. It's very ghost gray, kind of camouflage-ish. So again, the performance is better than what we see at like Int'l Air Base in Turkey on the Syria map, which is fantastic. There still looks like to be, this is all first impressions. This is my first flight, but it still appears to be quite a lot of like details. Things don't seem to be quite as absolutely perfectly, amazingly detailed as at, like, say, Int'l on the Syria map, but I don't think it really matters. It doesn't need to be quite as detailed as that. I'd rather have a little bit more performance, which I'm seeing now, as opposed to the crazy over-the-top detailing of Int'l, but at the expense of a lot of performance at that airbase. And we can see, as we see our F-16 bumping and bouncing around the taxiway, it is definitely not a flat taxiway. And we can see the very, I guess, infamous or famous curves and bumps in the runway here at Anderson Air Force Base. Anderson Air Force Base, of course, itself has a ton of history to it. A lot of B-52 sorties were flown out of Anderson Air Force Base during the Linebacker 1 and Linebacker 2 campaigns in 1972 over North Vietnam. Most of the arc light kind of strikes from B-52s against like Laos or Cambodia, or even close air support flights from B-52s for troops in South Vietnam, were conducted from air bases that were actually closer, with Anderson Air Force Base really being a main B-52 launching site, or home air base, for the Linebacker 1 and 2 campaigns in 1972. Alright, let's make sure we're not getting lost here. I really wish that the F-10 map showed a good taxi diagram laid over the top of it. That could be a really cool addition to the functionality of the F-10 map for players. Some nice covered hangars here for different aircraft so that maintenance crews and whatnot can work on them without being exposed to the direct sunlight. Alright, so we'll make a nice right-hand turn up here. Alright, looks like taxiway Foxtrot. Again, that's why it would be awesome to have a nice little taxi diagram overlaid on the F-10 map. It'd be kind of like, look, you're in the cockpit looking at your iPad that you've got on your kneeboard to determine where you are. Yeah, so we got a displaced threshold over here, so we'll just take off on the full runway, even though you can take off at a displaced threshold. Yeah, we can definitely feel lots of bounces and bumps. And man, these taxiways are huge. Built for B-52s, I suppose. This makes me really want to have things like AI, B-2 Spirits, and AI, beautiful new AI B-52 models, maybe even an AI B-1. That'd be pretty darn cool. And there is that huge bow in the runway here at Anderson Air Force Base that we can really see there. That is really, really interesting. So with this, we'll go ahead and we will run up and we will take off. So we'll go ahead and click off the nose wheel steering and we'll hold the brakes. We'll run up to full mill, release brakes, burner. I think this map is going to be an absolutely fantastic training map, and it's going to be a new place to fly for free for players who maybe are on a budget that are tired of the Caucasus. Holy crap, I am so tired of the Caucasus. I can't even bring myself to fly on the Caucasus anymore. And look at that. That's cool. I'd kind of forgotten that Anderson Air Force Base was on a cliff. Woo! How cool is that? We'll try and slow it down a little bit. We don't want to go too fast in our F-16 here. Wow, the water looks really good. It's so deep blue. I lived in the Caribbean. as a professional scuba diver for a total of about 6 years. And it definitely looks like tropical blue water. That's really cool. Wow, look at the reefs. That is awesome. Trees in the jungle look pretty okay. I think the water's edge and the beach area is where the map really stands out. From a first impression kind of standpoint. Over here, the trees are looking a lot nicer. Wow, I just love the beach areas and the transition to the coral reefs. And I'm so glad I finally get to fly in a kind of more or less realistic situation in a ROCAF F-16. Growing up around military pilots who flew in World War II and Vietnam, I was always surrounded by old leather flight jackets and iconography of the flying tigers and long-range radio communication and radar stations here at Guam. Probably most likely part of the large defensive defensive systems that are used for ballistic missile sensing and being hopefully able to intercept them, say if China or North Korea decided to launch a bunch of ballistic missiles at the United States. But anyway, surrounded by that kind of iconography of the flying tigers and the Republic of China on flight jackets and on patches and things like that. So I've always been fascinated by kind of the legacy and the history of the Republic of China Air Force as a result. And so it's very cool, like I said, to be able to fly one in DCS in an area that it makes sense to fly it in. I guess you could fly it on the Caucasus if you wanted something green, but it just doesn't make sense. That looks like a little resort down there. That looks like fun. And there, that is the other airport on Guam. I believe it's called Antonio B. Juan. And even flying an F-16, we're going pretty fast. It's still taking a while to move down the island itself. It's a large island. It's larger than I would have expected it or felt it to be. Pretty unimaginable being a United States Marine or a US or a soldier, a GI, and having to fight literally for every single inch of this island against the Imperial Japanese. And all of the atrocities that were committed by the Japanese upon the population of the island when they first took over the island in 1941. And there are some tales of extreme heroism from those who were able to escape to the interior jungles of Guam and launch a resistance movement against the Imperial Japanese that were stationed on Guam. Looks like a long breakwater out here for a beautiful protected harbor. and there's a unused airstrip there that is listed on the map, but interestingly enough, on the map in DCS World, it's listed as being a closed airfield, but it does have a couple spots to spawn helicopters on it. I guess if the Chinese were invading and there's ballistic missiles raining down everywhere on the island, you could use this old airport as a place to launch and recover aircraft if you needed to. Like a junkyard? Some kind of... not sure what that is. Oh, kind of bunkers. Weapon storage bunkers, I guess. Wow, this tropical map with the beautiful clouds is just awesome. I think helicopter pilots are going to love this map. I think it'll be cool to see what people do in terms of coming up with different, you know, exercise type missions on this map. You could place 2 fully formed carrier battle groups on the map and have them fight it out. F-14s and F-18 heaven doing that. Oh, that beautiful reef system down there is just awesome. I love it. And wow, man, Guam is a lot bigger than I would have thought it to be. Some kind of military installation down there, not totally sure what. I don't know, I've never been to Guam, so I don't know all that much about all these different installations that we're seeing around here. Oil storage tanks down there, or fuel storage tanks for another little harbor area. Little island over there. Very cool. Dense jungle. I'm hoping upon hoping that maybe this is a nice technology demonstrator from Eagle Dynamics, that they are going to maybe make a Vietnam map with this kind of jungle tropical feel. Because man, a Vietnam map in DCS, I could die happy after that, that's for sure. This beautiful coastline. And a Vietnam map could be awesome, of course, for combat, but Vietnam geographically is a incredibly beautiful place. Places like Cam Ranh Bay, things like that, with the massive cliffs, little island cliffs that stick out with a little bit of patch of jungle on top, just unbelievable, breathtaking views there, that's for sure. And I'm just hoping upon hoping that maybe this map is like Eagle Dynamics practicing for a Vietnam map. The fact that this is free is awesome, and if you guys have made it this long through the video, the map is only about 9 gigabytes, so it doesn't take up all that much space, which just makes sense, right? The actual geographical area of the map is not all that large. How are we doing on fuel? Fuel's totally good. And now we're coming up northbound along the eastern coast of Guam. I guess the highland areas of Guam are down on the southern end of the island, and then we're starting to get into these cliff areas along the coast that we saw around Anderson Air Force Base when we first took off. Oh, golf course.
Altitude. 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 Pull up. Pull up.
Let's pop up and we'll fly over Anderson before we head off towards Rota. And there's big old Anderson Air Force Base. And then we can see some of the old derelict air bases over on this part of the island, right over here, just adjacent to Anderson Air Force Base. A whole ton of weapon storage bunkers, along with derelict grown over airfields over here, which I'm sure many DCS players will be using as FARPs. And there have been many cases lately of American aircraft actually using these runways, F-16s, F-35, F-18s, even F-15Es, using those runways in preparation for, or to practice using unprepared airfields to launch strikes from them, where, say, an aircraft like a C-130 carrying a bunch of weapons, followed by another C-130 carrying a bunch of fuel, followed by a swarm of F-16s, F-15s, F-18s, you name it, coming in to then rearm and refuel based off of the fuel carriage of those C-130s, and then rearming based off the weapons carried by that C-130, and then using that to go. Another concept that's been floated by the Air Force as of late has been to have F-15Es be kind of weapons trucks, where they carry a ton of guided weapons, even on stations where they can't actually drop those weapons in a guided form, to then be able to use those F-15E weapons trucks to rearm other aircraft that land at the FARP, or the unimproved airfield. Now what that does is it allows those F-15Es, because they're rated to carry those weapons, they can carry the weapons in their built-up configuration. Ground crew, like say from the C-130 toting the weapons, don't have to then actually spend time putting the weapons themselves together. They just go ahead and go for it, pull the weapons off the F-15Es, CFT racks or weapon stations on the wings or belly, and then slap them onto a waiting F-16 or F-35 to then go about their mission set. This is an incredibly important kind of scenario because it allows a weapons carriage platform to be a lot faster than a C-130, as well as bringing the weapons to the fight in a very in a ready-to-use configuration with no kind of need to actually build anything. So this should be Rota up here at our waypoint 3. Let's take a look at the map and just confirm that. Yep, that's Rota. I love this skin. It's an anniversary skin for the Republic of China Air Force. So we do have a bit of wind in this mission today, and it appears that the kind of bug in DCS 2.7 where when you're up high, the white caps and things don't actually show up seem to still be present, as the water looks too glassy from my perspective. Now, one thing you have to be careful of as a DCS World pilot is, well, as any pilot for that matter, real life, Microsoft Flight Simulator, DCS, doesn't matter, is when you're flying over very, very featureless terrain like water or flat desert, it can be really, really difficult to judge your altitude over the terrain height. And so you can find yourself accidentally flying yourself right into the water because you don't have any visual references to help your brain kind of distinguish how high you are above the water or above that desert. And so pilots have been known in the past to accidentally fly themselves right into the water. And it's definitely a tragic occurrence. Alright, here's the island of Rota. Oh, yacht club there. Back to that very blue tropical reef system along the beach, which is just awesome. I love it. Large cliff areas. Oh, I really like this side of the island. These cliffs, the exposed dirt rather than being grassed over. It kind of really shows that Eagle Dynamics put a lot of work into, you know, really nailing the terrain. And with a lot of these volcanic islands, we have one high spot and then a lower, flatter spot of the island. And here is the airport. What's it called? Rota International. That makes sense. I'm sure plenty of DCS World pilots are going to be using this airport as a launching point to go and sink a bunch of communist Chinese ships coming to advance on the islands. I definitely know that I want to build a giant mission where the Chinese are trying to invade the islands here. Lots of ships. Their new aircraft carriers, all this kind of stuff. They've already taken Taiwan, they're trying to take Japan, and all of the Asian nations that fly jets like the F-16, the F-5, the F-15, F-18s, all kinds of things will be kind of doing a last-ditch kind of stand at the Mariana Islands, and I think that would be a lot of fun. And then we can see the islands over here of Tinian and Saipan. Tinian, of course, has its place in history as the launching point for the Enola Gay and Boxcar when they went to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, effectively ending Japanese resistance during World War II. A big part of my training as an aviation historian was looking at the historiography, which is kind of the history of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And in all of the documents I've read and all of the reports I've read, all these kinds of things, the 1-2 punch of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, as well as the declaration of war by the Soviet Union upon Japan, is what forced Emperor Hirohito to concede to the fact that they had finally lost the war and were going to surrender. And I truly believe that the loss of life, while terrible and horrific, from the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki did save lives in the end, because an all-out invasion of the Empire of Japan's home islands would have been absolutely horrific, not just for United States service personnel, but also for the population of Japan itself, which would be, in my opinion, if they did not surrender, would have had to have been more or less wiped out. an interesting fact that really brings this fact home is only very recently, within about, I want to say about the last 5 years, the United States ran out of its stock of Purple Hearts. The posthumous as well as living badge given to United States service personnel for wounds received in combat. So many Purple Hearts were made. I believe the figure off the top of my head is around 2 million were built in the lead up to the invasion of Japan, that they only just ran out just a few short years ago. Many United States service personnel who were wounded in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq received Purple Hearts that were originally built or created for giving to service personnel who would have received them in the event of an invasion of Japan. For me, that one statistic, when I read it when I was going through the writing process of a long paper on the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, really forced that home to me, that and really made me think about, while the bombings were horrific and terrible, I think in the end they ended up saving lives, not just American, but also Japanese lives, and most likely Soviet lives as well, as if the Soviets had to also intervene and invade. I don't quite remember what this island is called here, but we've got Tinian here and Saipan over here. Now there are some other islands that are out here that are kind of more or less in this area here, like Farallon de Medellin, I think it's called, or I'm not quite sure how I'm supposed to pronounce it. But anyway, those islands are used as live bombing ranges by American, Republic of China, Japanese, you name it, for Asian Air Forces training operations. But we should probably go ahead and get rid of some of these bombs if we're going to land at Saipan International. I'm just trying to find a good spot to drop these bombs. This island looks pretty good. Why don't we go ahead and bomb this island? We'll put them right here along this tree line. Here we go, rolling in. And this will bring us down to a lower altitude as well for our additional exploration of these islands. Come on.
Altitude. Altitude.
And 1, 2, 3. Oh, master arm. Huh. All right. That was just a show of force. So we'll come around for a re-attack. Pulling hard to get the nose down. And again, we're going to drop these bombs right in a string along that tree line. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we'll pull off. Nice. That'll get rid of a lot of weight for us. And here is Tinian, infamous Tinian. I don't know if the current airport here of Tinian International is one of the original airports. I don't think it is. I think North Field is the original airport or airfield where Enola Gay and Boxcar were launched from. I believe that where they're located on the island, the runways were not long enough to actually warrant further buildup after the war for, you know, jet aircraft use. Now these islands, the Mariana Islands themselves, Mariana sounds rather Spanish, doesn't it? In a lot of ways, but it was... The Spanish originally took the islands in the 1800s and governed the islands as a colony, and the islands were eventually taken over by the United States, I believe after the Spanish-American War, in which the United States took the Philippines as well as other Pacific islands from the Spanish Empire at the time. And here's Northfield. Another area where I believe we're going to see a lot of missions with aircraft like Harriers popping out of the jungle at these very unimproved surfaces. Oh, those kind of popped up a little late. Those look like some sort of communication relay antennas. So here is the remnants of those runways here at Northfield that were used by the Army Air Force in their bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But also more than that, these runways were used for the firebombing campaign by Curtis LeMay against the Japanese as well. They weren't just used for the sole purpose of atomic weapons testing, or not testing, but rather employment. The reason why Saipan was chosen as the place to launch those attacks from was because they were far out of the range of anything the Japanese possessed at the time to be able to attack those sites preemptively. If the Japan somehow had figured out what the Manhattan Project was and what they were doing at Saipan and preparing for, the Japanese, unless they use an aircraft carrier, which at the time in 1944-45 was completely undoable for the Japanese. They could not attack Saipan. Some of their longest ranged aircraft, like the G4M Betty bomber, couldn't reach Saipan from big old golf course there, from the mainland islands. And this is pretty much it for the landmass of this map. It is pretty darn small, but as you can see, I mean, it took us a fair amount of time to fly around all of them. Oop, another golf course. This must be where all the admirals go for their rest and relaxation playing golf. Cool beach reef area there. Another golf course. And a little island offshore here. That's kind of cool. Alright, so we'll fly down over Northfield-ish area on Tinian, so that way we get lined up for a approach to Saipan International. Flying definitely a little bit faster than I should around here. That's just so that way we don't make a video that's way too long. And we'll go into the brake. We'll make a right-hand brake turn, so that way we're not turning into that mountain over there on our left. Oh, that's a cool beach area. Yep, kind of ballooned up a little bit, more than I would have wanted to. And we'll keep the airspeed bleeding off. Gears coming down. Make sure we're all safed up. Should have done that earlier. Bring in a little bit of right rudder to help us kind of squeeze around this turn. Probably didn't have quite enough offset from the runway itself, and I really don't want to overshoot because I don't want to look bad on YouTube. And we're getting too low. Move our seat up a little bit. That's going to help us with the visibility on final approach. A little bit fast. Definitely not going to overshoot. Might even undershoot. Fighting for that center line bit. Want to always land on the center line. And right on the 1,000 footers. Oh, a little bit further beyond that. Get in some aero braking. Keep us on center line. Keep that nose up as long as I can, and there it comes down. And we'll get on the brakes. Nose wheel steering's on. And can we make Delta? We can make Delta. Perfect. The tower thanks us for that in our efforts to get off the runway as soon as possible. Pull in the speed brakes. And we'll taxi to the terminal area. Those palm trees are really, really cool. This is such a cool map. I always just love new places to fly. And just like at our previous place where we took off, Anderson Air Force Base, the taxiway doesn't feel perfect. Very similar to the way Ramat David on the Syria map is very, very bumpy. This taxiway feels very, very bumpy as well. Clouds and the color of the sky and the green of the map, I love it. I think this is going to be a map that people are either really, really going to love, like myself, I really love it so far, or people who maybe won't necessarily find too much of a use for it because it's tiny islands with lots of water. But I think that we're definitely going to be able to have some really cool scenarios. And I even envision a lot of maybe even campaign builders creating campaigns that aren't necessarily centered around combat, but rather the preparation for combat and, you know, almost like a red flag kind of campaign here on the Mariana Islands. As well as there's lots of possibilities about, say, a Chinese invasion of the Mariana Islands, all of these kinds of things. Alrighty guys, well that was very, very cool to have a flight across a brand new map here in DCS World. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope you don't get too irritated by my constant talking as you're watching this. And I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day and really, really enjoy this new free map for DCS World. And I hope you guys fly safe out there if you're a real pilot, and stay healthy out there for all of you guys. So we'll see you in the next one.